Well, welcome. We have the great privilege today to be with journalist and author and UFO researcher Robert M. Stanley. Welcome, Robert.
Thanks for having me, Alfred.
You know, I've read your new book, which I hardly recommend to people. It's Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C. and this is an historic book because you've assembled over 900, I believe, reported UFO and extraterrestrial sightings over the past 160 years, and that's the largest in history.
For Washington, D.C., yes.
Yes, right. And I had been thinking, I said, you know, I want to see if I can reduce this to what journalists call a headline.
Okay.
and this is an extraordinary book, and I really recommend it to all UFO researchers, to all people interested to exopolitics, and to all citizens interested to what is happening in our body politic today. And so I came up with a kind of a model headline, which you may agree with and which you may disagree with.
All right.
But this came out of reading especially the last part of your book, in which you begin to tie together some of your observations, which I think also are congruent with some of the other independent research lines which have begun to come together in this area. And I'm going to read the headline to you.
Okay.
And then maybe that'll be a jumping off point for a discussion about not only whether the headline should be tweaked or changed, but different cases that you came across in terms of your research in this book that bear to this.
Okay.
Okay, and the headline is this. Author, meaning you, Washington, D.C. is a portal for negative Orion Gray UFO ET New World Order takeover. Now,
yeah.
in fact, what I'll do is I will put it in your Skype, because it's kind of a mouthful.
Yes.
You know, we as journalists have to labor. I think I have only 80 characters, including spaces, when I have to construct some of these headlines, and so that is there, and that's kind of that's what came to my mind when I read your book. I said, oh, there are 900 cases. Some of them are from other ethical ET races, but the majority of them seem to be from intrusive grays.
Yeah.
And from what I know about the grays, they seem to be from Orion grays, and they seem to be on a New World takeover kind of mode.
Right.
And if we use the word portal is an interdimensional term, and going by, you know, a number of the photos that you've shown over the years, and with your colleague Will Allen and his photos showing the interdimensional portals, because they tend to be fourth dimensional extraterrestrial civilizations, and Washington, D.C. being a portal for all sorts of stuff that you show. Even in the Capitol, there being all kinds of strange interdimensional beings. So that's the kind of consideration that I put in there in that particular headline. But that's just a draft. That's just like a sounding board for our conversation. Is that okay by you, or?
It is, Alfred. What I'm not okay with is the fact that I think I'm accurate. I think the conclusion of the book that you're alluding to, Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C., unfortunately, I think that is actually the case, that negative ETs or demonic extraterrestrials really are not just visiting Washington, D.C., but they're based there. And that they're very skilled at manipulating our key individual leaders, whatever you want to call them, elected representatives, and even unelected representatives in non-governmental organizations. I think there's quite a bit of manipulation going on behind the scenes. And, I mean, they certainly have every opportunity, and they appear to have some sort of motive to keep us all under their thumb. So, yeah, unfortunately, I think that that's accurate.
Yeah, I mean, you allude to some of the inside stories,
Yeah.
which I think that, for example, witnesses like Kathy O'Brien talk about, and the whole MK Ultra, the use of monarch presidential models by such, quote, legislative eminences like Senator Robert Byrd, whose district was in a CIA, with a CIA facility, such that he wielded enormous fiscal power, but also ran a lot of the sexual monarch models and a lot of this kind of pornography, the sexual underground.
Yes, specifically for mind control purposes.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what people need to understand. And oddly enough, what I recently discovered about the author of the book and the movie, The Exorcist, Mr. Blatty, before he wrote that book, he had gone to various Jesuit schools and graduated from Georgetown University there in Washington, D.C. Eventually, he made his way to the U.S. Air Force's Psychological Warfare Department, oddly enough, to do propaganda for our government. And as I point out in the conclusion, that is the same branch of our government that was involved with not only allowing Mr. Michael Kino to come in, an avowed Satanist, to come in and use his particular brand of magic to influence events around the world, but he did it at Bolling Air Force. He actually studied how to do this at Bolling Air Force Base in Washington, D.C. So Satanists are part of and parcel of the Pentagon. Oddly enough, a pentagram, just like Washington, D.C. has a giant pentagram on the ground there. And my understanding is that wasn't by accident. A lot of people have said that it's incorrect, to say that because it's broken. But it turns out that's actually one form of a very powerful form of a pentagram for not only calling the demonic entity, call it devil, Satan, whatever, but also binding that negative energy to that location, to the individuals who set that spell. So, I'm really sad to say this, Alfred, because it was not only shocking to me, but I really don't like to tell people bad news. I mean, who wants to give bad news? It doesn't make me feel good. I just want to be very clear with you and your audience. But I wouldn't even be mentioning this if I didn't think it was accurate. And I also feel like it's time for us to be aware. It's time for us to wake up from this, as you call it, the permanent war economy, and realize who the puppet masters are. It's not just a handful of very elite, egotistical men. It is the powers behind them, the puppet masters, these demonic extraterrestrials, wherever they're from, Orion, Zeta Reticuli or Draconis, whatever. That's not as important as the fact that they're here and that they've embedded themselves covertly into places like the Vatican and Washington, D.C.
Right. Now, let's step back and go through some of the history that you've put together. This goes back to 1850.
Right.
And you've also tied in the history of Washington, D.C., which goes back to the Vatican and the John Carroll family, which I was unaware of.
Me too.
Until you brought that up, that Capitol Hill actually all belonged to the Vatican. Is that correct?
Well, it belonged to people who still are devoted to the Vatican and its ultimate goal, which they've obviously done a good job at creating a global empire. The Holy Roman Empire really does exist, and the Vatican is the seat of power. But what I was really curious about, I had no idea really, was that the Jesuit order is highly influential in a covert fashion. They are like the Jedi Knight of the Vatican, you know. But unfortunately, they're not really there to serve the light. They're, as far as I can see, they're there to do the work of the dark side. And again, this is sort of like the movie, the Star Wars theme. There were people covertly who had embedded themselves, integrated into the system in order to corrupt it and to bring everybody at odds with one another. In other words, divide and conquer. And you can see this recently in the debates over the debt ceiling and other things. People are at each other's throat. This is the work of the dark side. Every time you see that happening, they're not just doing it to confuse us. They actually gain power from us, and they actually draw, my understanding is they draw the negative energy from our emotions when we are angry, afraid, confused. You know, all of those negative emotions actually feed them. You know, like Star Wars again. The Emperor says, you know, I feel your anger. You know, he was actually enjoying seeing them getting upset. You know, so like I said, I've had experience with this. I know it's real. It's unfortunate that we have to deal with this, but living in denial of the dark side and its influence over our world has got to come to a screeching halt here in the very near future if we are to survive and, or more importantly, to evolve to the next level of being.
Yeah, you know, you bring up the very interesting point of the financial debates. Just two comments. Number one, the entire money system, debt-based money system, of course, goes back to the Federal Reserve Bank, which is neither federal nor a reserve bank. It's a private bank beneficially owned by the Rothschild family. Right. This is proven in a U.S. Senate committee document made public in 1976. Right. And so there you're dealing with, again, the interdimensional extraterrestrials in the sense that this debt-based money system is one more means that the Orion Greys and their masters, the Draco Reptilians, maintain control over the human race. So that's what we're dealing with. And the fact that the United States will not even confront either nationalizing or abolishing the Federal Reserve Bank shows that they're totally oblivious of the harness that they're in.
This is true, and you know, one of the things I got to go step back to The Exorcist. There was a series of movies that were written after the book. The book is based on a real story that took place in Washington, D.C. for people who don't know, and it occurred in 1949. And of course, the Vatican was involved in breaking the communication or the stranglehold, the telepathic manipulation that was going on between that boy and this entity. It wasn't a ghost, in my opinion. It was a demonic extraterrestrial entity. And I think that there are people, in fact, I'm sure there's people within the Vatican that know this. But when I looked at another movie done by the same group, or I should say directed by, not written by, but directed by Mr. Blatty, it was called The Exorcist: The Beginning. And it goes back to a place in Kenya, Africa, of all places, where an entity, an extraterrestrial entity that they say, you know, they show you a statue, and a figurine statue and a large statue of this entity that the Sumerians knew and the Assyrians knew, what we would now call an extraterrestrial. It's humanoid, but it's clearly has different features. And they back in the day they depicted it as winged, but in the movie they said this is where Satan fell to earth. And then they built an underground base or temple where they would have to perform human sacrifices to this entity. And what was fascinating is the way the movie opens is that an entire legion of Roman soldiers had gone down there to attack this thing. They all turned on each other and just killed each other. The only people that walked away was, I think, one or two priests. And they reported back to the Vatican, wow, you know, this is what the entity did to us. So I know it's just a movie, okay? I'm not that, don't get me wrong, I'm not that silly. I understand the difference between fact and fiction, but obviously art does imitate life, and I do feel like they're trying to get the information out there, not just it's just not just entertainment value. That we got to go back to what I said before about the psychological warfare department of our government. They clearly they want to influence our thinking as much as possible, and on some level tell us the truth and then dismiss it as fiction. It's a very twisted way of neutralizing people's ability to discern what is real and what is not. So I think they call it dissuading somebody. And obviously, when you have the power of the media, specifically Hollywood, producing these very expensive, extravagant films, it has an effect on a person's psyche. Of course, it didn't have that effect on me because I've been researching this for years and taking it at face value and also doing a correlative analysis of all the data as I find it. So I do think that there is a silver lining to all this, is recognizing that these entities exist, confronting them, because they obviously have to exist here covertly. They really don't want us to confront them. They don't want to admit that they're here and what they're doing to us. Because they know we would resist. And at some point, what I've done, I don't know if you had a chance to look at the global poll that I set up on my website. But
I actually participated in it.
Oh, thank you. It's pretty simple. For anybody who hasn't seen it, it's unicusmagazine.com. It's unicusmagazine.com. And it says vote. It's very simple. Take you a few minutes. And all I'm asking is for people to vote on one simple question. Is whether or not we should welcome peaceful extraterrestrials to interact with us here on Earth. Because that's never been done before. I know a few groups have thought about it, but nobody's ever really taken a global poll, because you got to think about it. It's going to affect everybody. And that's one of the reasons that the elite, especially those who are involved with the negative extraterrestrials, the reason that the elite do not want us to have direct, open communication in our relationship with the good ETs is because not only are they going to tell us what's going on here with the bad guys, but ultimately, I think most people are going to say, "Wow, we want to emulate the good ETs. Look at them. Look at the way that they do their healthcare is better than ours. Their economic system is better than ours. Their transportation is better than ours. Their communication, etc." People would actually look to them as as a model for what they would like to become, what our society should become at some point. And that would really throw a monkey wrench into the what the bad guys have set up here with what you call the New World Order.
Now, some of the information that we've come across that is congruent with what you've researched is, for example, that U.S. military intelligence had concluded one faction that the Orion Gray and Draco Reptilian faction had timelined Earth for a takeover sometime between the year 2000 and 2030. They came to this conclusion in 1964. So we're right about a third of the way through that period now.
Right.
And of course, this is a multi-dimensional battle and a multi-dimensional takeover. It's not as though we're alone in the universe at the mercy of these fourth-dimensional predators.
Right.
Because we are multidimensional creatures, and there are ethical extraterrestrial civilizations, as you point out.
Yep.
And then there's divine assistance from the spiritual spheres.
Yes.
What are the cases that you have researched here that tend to support that kind of hypothesis of a timeline takeover that you would say?
I don't have any direct examples of that in the book. I do know that there's been times, like you mentioned before about Eisenhower, I think it was you, that said that Eisenhower had met with extraterrestrials back in '54 who were human, who wanted to help us to deal with the Greys, but Eisenhower and his administration, I guess people in the Pentagon, said, no, we don't want your help. I think because part of it was they were saying the stipulation was, we'll help you but with the Greys, but you need to stop your atomic weapons program, or just atomic power, nuclear power. You've got to stop that right now.
Yeah.
So we didn't take that deal.
Yeah, that's a case that you in fact mention in your book.
Right, and then in 57, Eisenhower again was approached, allegedly, by another human extraterrestrial that actually lived at the Pentagon, or I should say allegedly lived at the Pentagon from 1957 to, I think it was 1960. And again, he was a peaceful extraterrestrial that was really, all he wanted to do was help not only America, but mankind. Because America being a superpower, obviously, I think that's why we attract more of them, or at least we know about it. Them coming to our leaders and trying to talk some sense into them. Unfortunately, that obviously has not happened as of yet. But again, I think we already have a covert relationship that predates way far before Roswell. I mean, I do mention Colonel Corso's diary in the summary as well, because the conclusion is broken up into two parts. I make a very, very deliberate statement about what we just discussed, that some of our leaders in Washington, D.C. are probably being manipulated by the negative extraterrestrials.
Right.
And I give examples of that, some pretty clear examples of demons in Washington, D.C., I think.
Right.
And then the second half of it, I show I give by example a timeline of what our government clearly knows based on the public record. And I've never seen anybody put it together quite that way. And I think it's extremely compelling if you look at it. Obviously, our government, people within our government would have to know that they're up against something or some group that is extremely dangerous, manipulative, bad, evil, whatever you want to call it. And that may be another reason they don't want to admit anything publicly that extraterrestrials exist, because you can't just say, oh, the good guys are here. Eventually, the whole thing is going to come out, and it's good, bad, and ugly. So at some point, though, this is why I did the polling. Well, the way it was described to me is if 51%, just 51% of the people actually vote, yes, we would like to have contact with you, extraterrestrial representatives, then legally, ethically, and morally, that opens the door for them to land. Even if there is a conflict that ensues, and it probably will, especially the bad guys, they're gonna raise all kinds of problems because they don't want it to happen. But if it did happen, if the door is open that way through this voting that I've set up, global, first time as far as I know, global vote on an issue that affects everyone on the planet, or the future for everyone. The way it was described to me by the benevolent extraterrestrials was that this is how they do it. Any issue that affects the entire planet or a species on a planet, of course they're going to ask everybody's opinion. It's not quite as elitist or corrupt as what we experience here.
Now, that's a very so what are your plans with regard to that poll?
Well, I mean, I have tried. So far, it's only been out there a little over a month, and the numbers are trending very high. I don't mean, the volume is, there's been a few thousand people so far that have voted, but it's just getting started. I really need a few billion people to be legitimate. I need at least a few billion people to vote. It's not a one-time deal. Like a normal vote is just one day a year. This thing probably could go on for a year. So through the help of individuals like yourself, we get the message out there, let people know this isn't a joke. It'll only take you a few minutes. It's free. It's anonymous. You can only vote once. And this is extremely important in the future of mankind at this time. So we'll see how this plays out. I do think that one of the things I need to do is take screen captures of the statistics. You can do that through this system now, where you can show it as a pie chart. So every month I'll show where people's opinions are trending. And so far, most people, even the tough questions like should we outlaw war, a lot of people, that's probably that has the lowest numbers. A lot of people feel like, you're going to leave us defenseless? You can't do that. I actually stayed in there. I said outlaw war and institute a democratically elected, global, non-lethal police force. Because that's how the good guys do it. And my understanding is, no, of course you don't leave yourself defenseless, but at the same time, you don't just let these elitists run around starting wars wherever they want and killing people anytime they feel like it. It's again, the idea that the word that they like to use, especially in Washington, D.C., a lot is sacrifice. I don't think they even understand the meaning of that. Because human sacrifice is something we've been doing for the gods these alien gods for thousands of years. And again, that's something that really needs to come to a screeching halt because it's not benefiting us. It's benefiting them.
Right. Now, in that kind of mode, you talk a lot about George H.W. Bush
Yeah.
and his kind of almost being a vanguard of the negative dimensional ETs, where he would make himself into this channel and be able to use a hologram where he would show himself as a reptilian, in
Right.
kind of the David Icke mode. Could you talk a bit about that?
Obviously, I want to be clear about this. I am only, in that part of the book, I am simply quoting from Miss O'Brien, and I really don't know if that's true or not. She makes a lot of very wild accusations that may or may not be true. However, because George H.W. Bush was the head of the CIA for a period of time, I think just about anything, plus he's a member of Skull and Bones, I do think,
Yeah.
which is an extension of the Illuminati as far as I can tell. Clearly, he would have access to things like that, and he's been very, he's been less than forthcoming about what he knows. There's also a section in the conclusion there that talks about George W. Bush and how he was allegedly abducted by aliens when he was in the Air National Guard, and that's people say he went AWOL. Other people are saying, according to that, is that he actually was abducted.
There are different interpretations as to what happened to him during those years, and why, for example, Dan Rather lost his job when he went in search of those years.
Yeah.
And one of the explanations is that he had been pre-identified as U.S. president by quantum access time travel, and he was in a secret training program to be the future president. So, anyway.
It could be, but what I found interesting, and I understand that was a tabloid article that I was quoting from. However, I found it very interesting that because we know of other cases where people are abducted and they disappear for a period of time. Sometimes they return, sometimes they're never seen again. But according to that article, they said that when George W. Bush was abducted and was on this ship, that he said the aliens were trying to download something into his mind and he was resisting. Well, I find that fascinating. Again, we're back to what the Catholic Church would call possession.
Right.
Whether it's through technological means or whether it's through just pure mental power, it doesn't matter. The fact is that anybody that can invade your mind can cause you to do things that you normally wouldn't do, and that's really what we're talking about here when we talk about the concept of the need for exorcism by the church. Obviously, it's not effective because I also quote in there one of the lead, actually the lead exorcist for the Vatican says exorcisms are actually increasing, not decreasing. Well, what does that tell you? If he's being honest, he's also said that back in the 60s that the devil, however you want to interpret that, in my opinion, again, negative extraterrestrials, has infiltrated the Vatican. So that's not good news.
Right.
But I'm telling people this because I do believe it's time for us to address this as rationally as we possibly can. Okay, it's not like I'm trying to attack a church or a government. I'm saying that we are all in this together, and I do think we're in trouble. And this is one of the reasons that I'm asking people to vote, because I do think that the help is there. But here's the other scenario. The way it was described to me by the good, benevolent extraterrestrials is they can't just show up and say, hey, here we are, we want to help you. That would be seen as an intervention or an invasion. It would probably be spun around by the media and the government, our government, as an invasion. And that would not go well. And I'm sure that the good guys already know this, at least that's the way they describe it to me, is unless you welcome us, our hands are tied. There's only so much we can do. We can't just show up en masse and say, hey, we want to help you, you've got a problem. That wouldn't go over well.
Right. Okay, now, I'd like to ask you, here, there's a chart. I'm not sure that it can be seen that
I see
well.
it.
And the chart, I find it fascinating because it shows UFO sightings in D.C. by decades, going from the 1850s to the 2000s. And
Right.
it's the 1950s and the 2000s where the charts really jump.
Yeah.
How do you account for that? Could you account for the 1950s, and could you account for the 2000s? Not only what, by the events, but like what's the underlying dynamic as to why they jumped out in the 1950s and why they're jumping out in the 2000s, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's based on, this would just be speculation, okay?
Yeah.
In the 50s, I think part of it was we were doing some absolutely insane things with nuclear weapons, blowing up in the atmosphere, upper atmosphere. That's just nuts. So that was, I believe that was a time when the bad guys were very, very active, and the good guys were doing their best to try and intervene. That's when Jerry Wills was seated on this world, along with probably thousands of other human extraterrestrials that were here to help us. And of course, you can see by the chart that at least in Washington, D.C., it starts to trend downward until the 80s. In the 80s, it almost shuts off. And that was the time we were developing Star Wars Defense Initiative, beginning to officially, I think it already existed to some degree, but of course that would be illegal according to certain treaties. So, that was the year, though. That was the decade. And then it starts to trend up from there dramatically until this past decade, the 2000s. And in fact, it's still going on right now in this year, 2011. There's been attempted military intercepts and more photographs and eyewitness accounts. So it's ongoing. But what have we done in this decade is that it's absolutely insane. Is HARP, for one thing, is being used to broadcast these frequencies into the upper atmosphere and do all kinds of mind control on people, and also the spraying of the chemtrails. I wasn't too sure about that until recently when I saw this documentary, and it was so well done. I mean, the evidence was so incontrovertible that we are being poisoned in our environment. I mean, it really explains to me finally why so many birds, there's mass die-offs of birds and fish. It has to be related to the tons of aluminum gas that have been sprayed into the atmosphere. And it reminds me of, I mean, clearly they're doing this not only to poison us, but also to prevent the higher frequencies that are coming through our solar system right now. It's blocking our ability to connect, to receive those things. Just like, okay, fluoride, for example, is something that they put in the water, in the toothpaste, etc. That is a byproduct, a derivative byproduct of the aluminum manufacturing process. So again, it's a heavy metal, it's a soft metal that gets into my understanding is it gets into the pineal gland, and it literally blinds our third eye from having this visionary connection to the higher powers within the cosmos. So they're doing all kinds of things to block us from evolving and keeping us more docile and agitated. And so to answer your question, that is my opinion. Why the final component is this, and I think we have to discuss this, is that as you've discussed in other very fine articles and interviews, that there is something shifting within our solar system, within us, that we are going to have an opportunity to graduate to a higher level of being. Some people call it fifth dimension. I don't care what you call it, heaven, it's fine. All I know is that we are passing into, and I published articles about this back in the 90s, and people really jumped all over my case about it. Based on what Billy Meyer was told back in the 70s, is that our solar system was entering what they called a photon zone, where the energy was going to increase because we were coming into that a specific region of our galaxy that was more highly energized, and that as we pass through that would be a period of light or enlightenment that would occur. And I guess it happens twice as we go through my understanding is the solar system actually passes through us twice as it does a one galactic orbit or a galactic year. So it's a normal process, but right now the bad guys really don't want us to achieve enlightenment or evolve to the next level of being. So that's why they're being far more active than normal or previously, because we're on the verge, we're on the cusp of this transformational event.
Right, right. Now, just to make sure that I've, got it right, these two peaks in the 1950s and in the 2000s of UFO activity.
In D.C., yeah.
Yeah, in D.C. Are you saying that the UFOs involved in that are the ethical UFOs, or are you saying that they're the manipulative
bad guys?
UFOs? Sorry?
The bad guys, yeah. Okay, so you know what? It's not like I'm trying to dodge the question. I want people to be very clear about this. Unfortunately, the bad guys are here covertly, and the good guys are here covertly. So when we see any activities, you have to factor both sides in. In fact, they don't identify themselves as good or bad, but during these sightings, all we know is that they're here.
Yeah.
And I believe if you look at the behavior, at the actions of our so-called elected leaders, the bad guys have them right where they want them. And that's unfortunate. But I know the good guys have been trying to do what they can through telepathy and or direct intervention to try and straighten out the problem, or at least keep us from going too far off course before we get to this transitionary period that I was just mentioning.
Right.
So I hear what you're saying, and that's unfortunately that's the best answer I can give you, is to be slightly ambiguous.
Okay, so that now we're in the year. Now we're at a peak in the 2000, 2011, 2012.
Right.
We're getting to a point where it's a multi-dimensional transitional event.
Yeah.
And there are forces that are not only terrestrial, but that are interdimensional, that are attempting to keep us down and prevent us from evolving. That's part of what you're saying here. And that they are concentrated in Washington, D.C.
And yes, right. And as far as, based on my research, which has been 6 years now, I never thought it was going to go this long. I had no idea. I thought I was just going to write one article. I didn't know I was going to write a book. This was the first one, Close Encounters on Capitol Hill. Okay, and then the second one we've just been talking about, Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C. All told, that's about 800 pages of material that I've written in the last 6 years. Plus, if you go to my website at unicusmagazine.com and you look at the photographs, I collected still photos, movies, videos, and nobody's ever collected that much material specifically related to Washington, D.C. like that before. And the only reason I'm doing it is to prove a point. We've got a problem. We really have a problem. You cannot have that much activity going on in a secure location like that and there not be an agenda being served. There has to be some kind of agenda there. And the fact that it's all covert makes me very uneasy. And this is how I came to the conclusion that the bad guys really are. I mean, I'd had clues before, and I really didn't want to believe it. But ultimately, and I think I make this case, unfortunately, I make this case very conclusively, that there are extraterrestrials that are negative, highly manipulative, and they are based in D.C. Whether or not they're coming through Stargates or they actually have an underground base there, or both, is irrelevant. The fact of the matter is, and I guess the final icing on the cake is, there's clearly a collaboration between the inner circle, the Illuminati, the Vatican, Masons, key individuals, key players on this world, and they are global, that already know about these extraterrestrials and that they have an intimate relationship with them, the negative ones. And this is why, in my opinion, why they have declined the assistance of the good guys when they have offered it.
Yeah, and more information is coming out that I think is congruent with some of the research facts that you come out with in this book. For example, whistleblower Michael Prince has come out, has revealed that the first secret treaty between the U.S. government and the Orion Greys was not in the 50s. It was signed in 1934 by the Roosevelt administration in a battleship down in Panama, in Balboa, Panama. Now, that is congruent with your finding of Secretary of State Cordell Hull,
Right.
and the whole finding of gray extraterrestrials being preserved under the U.S. Capitol. And that was the first treaty that actually permitted the abduction of Americans in exchange for extraterrestrial technology. It was 1934. That predated the Orion Greys, according to this information, first treaty with the Third Reich, which is 1941.
Well, okay. So again, I summarized Colonel Corso's diary in the summer at the conclusion of my book, and he states in his diary that he felt that the Greys and these extraterrestrials have been around us for at least 40,000 years, which I believe that's based on Sumerian information. It's stunning to me to see how the people in the Pentagon really know so much information, a lot more than we give them credit for, but then again, they have obfuscated the truth so heavily over the years. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but occasionally they let things slip like that, and I'm thinking, wow, key individuals or certain people really know a lot, but their hands are tied, and I guess the old saying is you can't serve two masters.
Right.
So I feel for them. I mean, I understand their position. I'll tell you what was really also very shocking to me is to learn the role that secret societies, specifically the Vatican, and the Illuminati, the roles that they played in forming this country under the ruse of patriotism and freedom from tyranny, and yet they were creating this global empire, raising the new Atlantis here to dominate the world from this location. And it's just amazing to me, having been born and raised here in America, I thought I knew history until I actually started to peel back these layers, as you said, the Catholic connection is something people obviously don't want to talk about or they know nothing about because it's been fairly well hidden. That Maryland was a Catholic colony, and that all of that land that is now Washington, D.C., was donated by wealthy Catholic individuals who, some of them, as you said, the Carroll family, Bishop Carroll was, he and his family were very much influential in the Revolutionary War, for our so-called freedom from the British Crown.
Yeah, and you reveal in this book how, I believe it was a representative, perhaps it was John Carroll himself, who was a Jesuit-trained representative,
Yep.
Came with special letters from the Black Pope, who's the Jesuit Superior General,
Yeah.
To engender the American Revolution here.
Yes, specifically for religious, everybody understands that. This isn't just freedom that we're talking about. It's not anarchy. It's a specific type of freedom, and they say freedom for religion, but also it could be freedom of religion if you're an anarchist or an atheist. But the reason they put that in there is because they wanted to be able to practice Catholicism here in the New World as promised to them by the King of England at that time. I believe it was Charles I. In any case, they weren't satisfied with just practicing religion freely. They wanted to use that as a foundation for expanding an empire. And here's the other thing that I kind of knew this, but it wasn't clear to me until I did the research. Catholicism isn't just a religion; it's a government. It's a form of governance. And what I find truly fascinating is that prior to becoming Christian, the Roman pantheon of gods was headed by Jupiter, who was always depicted as a man. It's not a planet; it's a man, and he's sitting in a throne. And his house, the Temple of Jupiter, was called the Capitolium, and that's exactly the model that they used to put and it was always built on a hill, So Capitol Hill is where they put the Capitolium, the Capitol that we call the Capitol. That was a Roman invention, and you have to, if you follow the provenance, it goes directly back to before they became a Christian entity, before the Roman Empire fell, became the Holy Roman Empire, was based on Christianity. Jove, or Jupiter, was the head of all the gods, let's call them extraterrestrials, and he was the one that the senators would somehow communicate with and to get information about how to proceed with the expansion and the maintenance of the Roman Empire. And then at some point, when it switched to what? Christianity, they replaced Jove with Jehovah. It was seamless, but it was always based on a form of global governance, based on a global governance that had a direct authoritarian descendants or hierarchy from the heavens.
Right, and I think and it's here in your book where you describe that John Carroll, as a specially trained excuse me, Jesuit agent whose family owned all what is Washington D.C. now, was sent here to Washington D.C. to start the American Revolution, but first was given a special secret document of the Jesuits, which was a plan for world conquest.
Right.
And in the Illuminati kind of vein, and so that was the plan upon which Washington D.C. was founded. Is this world conquest plan, kind of blueprint, and in fact, the owners of the land that became Capitol Hill changed it to Rome, changed the name of that to Rome at some point, didn't they?
Yeah, actually, when they first showed up there, I believe 1700s, when they first showed up and claimed the land, they named it Rome.
Right.
And the what is now Goose Creek actually they called it the Tiber River. They were trying to recreate Rome there, but obviously that name didn't last because there was other influences that religious and political considerations. But it's just fascinating to me how this has all been sub rosa. Everything has been just buried. And I think I saw, it was recently, Secrets of the Vatican. They were showing how gradually, more and more, U.S. presidents, even including Barack Obama, have gone and shook hands with the Pope at the Vatican. Why? It wasn't a religious act. It was a sign of... in fact, they've also said just this year, officially now, Rome is the sister city to Washington, D.C. And as I point out in the book, my book, Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C., on the Capitol building, the statue, so-called Freedom, is actually from Rome. It was a gift that was, it's all part of a Catholic, there's a Catholic connection there if you look for it, and specifically, it's a Roman Greco historical thing where it's not about, her name shouldn't be Freedom, her name should be tyranny, she was abducted by Hades in mythology. Persephone was actually abducted, so maybe she wanted her freedom, but she never got it. And the whole concept of abduction is something we're quite familiar with aliens, specifically the Greys, and whoever they really worked for, whoever genetically created them. That was the other fascinating thing that Corso said was he made it quite clear that those things are clones. And who made them? I doubt they cloned themselves. They might have, but why? And again, it reminds me of Star Wars, the whole clone army kind of thing. Who are they really serving?
Now, coming back to your questionnaire,
yes,
regarding the ethical ETs and inviting the ethical ETs in. What ethical ETs are you talking about, and where can people find evidence of them and of their participation? For example, in your book, who would be the ethical ETs you think that we're talking about here?
Well, in the conclusion, I do talk about 1954. I briefly mentioned Eisenhower in 54 and 57. There was also a case in, I believe it was 1972 or 3, where Gerald Ford was approached by another human extraterrestrial who had landed in Georgetown and teleported himself over to the White House. He got in to see, unannounced, uninvited. He actually, reportedly went in and had a dialogue with President Gerald Ford at that time, gave him what we would now call a CD of information, and encouraged him or tried to influence him to establish a kind of relationship with him. I also cite what Jerry Wills. I briefly cite what Jerry Wills has said about coming here from Tau Ceti, and that the good human extraterrestrials have been trying to help us since at least the 50s, maybe even sooner. People, can read that, an excerpt of that. If they could just go to unicusmagazine.com and click on the books, there's actually some excerpts, free excerpts there, that you can read what we're discussing here. But, generally speaking, I think all this information should be out in the open. That's one of the reasons I do what I do, invest so much time reporting this, because I don't just believe it's real. I know for a fact, based on my own experiences, that there are good ETs here as well as bad ETs, and they do play a role in our lives. It's unfortunate it all has to be covert, but I believe we hold the key. If we would, we certainly don't want to leave this in the hands of the elite, because they don't have our best interests at heart. So this gives us an opportunity to global of, I don't even say this, but I really think that this is one of our best opportunities to turn the tables and actually shift the course, the direction that we're going. If nothing else, at least it's a positive. It's one positive plan. If somebody has a better one, I'd love to hear your best with this Congressional Extraterrestrial Disclosure Act 2012. I thought that was very well written. However, I had zero faith in the elected representatives that are currently in Washington, D.C. Again, what I described in the conclusion of my new book, Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C., unfortunately, people, once they step inside the Beltway, that is a magic circle. And I know people are going to probably tune out when I say that. Okay?
Okay, so we're talking about the Beltway as a magic circle, yes. And I can see that in terms of the Washington, D.C. area being a portal for yes. these interdimensional forces, be they extraterrestrial or be they interdimensional from a spiritual, some sort of domain where Satan is an historic figure. You can call him kind of the Darth Vader of the Star Wars era,
Yeah. Right, but even he serves someone, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, exactly. So it's a hierarchy. What we're describing here for everybody is a hierarchy, much like I think what the symbolism on the back of the dollar bill, the so-called Great Seal. Nothing great about it, in my opinion. The geometry and the symbolism there, I know a lot of people have tried to decode it. To me, it looks exactly like something Manly P. Hall published years ago, which it shows a Masonic priest standing within geometric symbols, and he is communicating to an alien, or what they call conjuring a demon, and that demon is within its own set. He's standing within his own set of symbols, and they're having a communication. So one is human, one is alien. And they're communicating back and forth. And those same symbols are found on the back of the dollar bill. But I think it's describing not only a relationship, but a hierarchy that we serve under the so-called all-seeing eye.
Right. So do you think that you were saying that as soon as somebody gets elected and goes
yes.
to the Washington, D.C. area, they get
yes.
subsumed
yep.
within this, it's like a matrix.
It is. It really is. You're stepping right into their trap. And, as I quoted in the book, when I first heard Senator John McCain call it Satan City, I thought he was kidding. And then the more research I did, I realized he said this multiple times. He wasn't kidding at all. He would joke about it, but he was really saying something. And just recently, when they had the debates on raising the debt ceiling, an individual from the Black Caucus called it a Satan sandwich. I'm thinking, now where in the world did he come up? Why would he was describing the Republicans and the Tea Party. I understand that he felt trapped between the two. And thank God that now we know who the new enemy du jour is the Tea Party. I mean, let's go get them, right? Once we get rid of them, we're all good.
Yeah. So once again, it's the polarities and the duality of duality consciousness.
Yeah.
So that it's this extreme polarization, which is part of trauma-based mind control.
Yes.
Which is what is being brought down from these fourth-dimensional predator ETs and predator interdimensional beings like Satan or Darth Vader or whoever.
Yes.
Okay, so what we're saying is that the positive prognosis is for our consciousness to evolve and to open ourselves up to the positive influences, to the positive extraterrestrials.
Well, and also just that here's a very just simple way of summarizing what's going on. You can't solve a problem unless you know you have one. And this is one of the reasons we're having this dialogue right now, is to illustrate to people this isn't just my problem or your problem or an American problem. This is affecting all of us on this world. And if we don't evolve in the immediate future here, it's going to have severe repercussions. So just knowing that we have a problem that we need to address is the first step. Then how we proceed is open to debate. Like I said, I think we should ask for some assistance in this matter, but it also doesn't hurt to connect with even a higher power, because something created all this universe. It's not an accident. I do think a higher mind is involved, and I believe I've been touched by that or had communication with that on some level. And I think everybody's designed to have that kind of beyond the norm. I mean, supernatural, paranormal, whatever you want to call it, extra dimensional connection to the all that is. I'm having trouble saying this word. God has been a word that has been abused because it's also twisted into who's the biggest, baddest.
Right. So we're actually talking about another word for God that is not as stigmatized as source.
Or creator.
Or creator. And there are some models that say that, we carry a holographic fragment of the creator or source within each of us known as our souls. Right. So we're actually part of that creator.
Right.
And by activating all of that into a positive collective thought, we can elevate the reality that we're in, and that's the way out of this conundrum.
It's a very good step, Alfred. I'm glad you brought that up. And I know part of that process is not only recognizing the creator, the holographic blueprint on our souls within us individually, but then once you can see it in yourself, you can begin to see it in others. And once that starts to happen, it grows exponentially. And that's what the dark side really doesn't want to see happen, because it could catch, it would be like a virus or a wildfire. The thing could just spread around the world in like a blink practically of an eye. So that's what I'm counting on. I'm very optimistic, even though I know we've talked about some very negative things. I'm actually very encouraged, and I would also encourage other people is when you see things get dark, really anger-filled, chaotic, confused, that's the time when you really need to center yourself the most. I'm sorry if I sound like I'm preaching, but for me personally, I know that when I watch the news or I see information or I see people getting upset, that's the time when you really need to center yourself the most.
Well, Thank you so much. Well, I mean,
My pleasure.
that is a wonderful observation and a great place to come to a conclusion.
All right.
And I urge all of our viewers to really take a look at your book,
Thank
which
you.
is filled with over 900 cases and 160 years of what has been going on in Washington, D.C., and is the hidden force of of what is a lot of behind that process that we call there.
Yeah.
How can people best contact your work?
It's available at Amazon.com, or you can also, I've got a discount code up there if you go to unicusmagazine.com. That's UNICUS magazine.com. There's also a lot of free information. I really encourage people to look at the introductions of the books, the excerpts, and also specifically, you got to see for yourself visually the photographs, the videos, the movies that I've collected of Washington, D.C. I think you'll come away from it having a much better understanding of what's going on covertly there in our nation's capital.
Robert, thank you so much, and we're really honored to have you as a guest.
That's my pleasure.
And we look forward to having you in the future as events unfold.
Okay.
In this exciting transition that we're all participating in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.